Hey guys, what's up? How you guys doing? So how do you find great fantasy novels in the stores or online or in shops or places that sell fantasy novels? So how do you find them? Well, okay, there's different ways of doing it. In the past, there were a lot of really good fantasy novels. You would just walk into a store and you would look at a novel, you would kind of read what it was about, like, so you could tell, like, kind of like the back of it. Like, if you flip it over, you read the back of it and you're like, oh, that sounds like an interesting story. It just gives you like a summary of the kind of story it is. You never really know based on the kind of story it is, but it does give you like an idea of it. Have you read something like this in the past and did you like it? If yes, maybe you'd like this book. Or have you read something like this in the past and you haven't, and maybe you want to try it because it might be new. And then you flip it over to the front, and in the front, it would have these really good, it would have like a really good like illustration, really beautiful art. So like, for example, you would kind of like have amazing art in the front, and on the back, it'd be pretty cool. You could tell, like, for example, like here it says national bestseller. Of course, if something is a bestseller in the fantasy aisle, chances are it's very good. And because a lot of fantasy fans will just buy those books up if they're bestsellers. It just means a lot of fantasy fans like this book and enough to buy it a lot. So bestsellers, if you try to look for bestsellers in the fantasy aisle, you're going to find pretty good quality books, you know, more than just like, you're not really going to find like if you go to the bestseller section of the bookstore, you're not going to get like fantasy really. You might get some sci-fi a little bit. You might get a little bit of fantasy, but basically you're going to get fiction, nonfiction, whatever, all of those books, but it's not going to like be fantasy and stuff like that. They used to have awesome covers like this done. This one's done by, Michael Whelan. And it's just like really cool art on it. And it used to be a really big business making covers for books, but you know, I don't know if anymore they do that. But yeah, so the front of the book, you could tell, cool cover. It's always like, it's always cooler reading a book that has a cool cover, even whether it's good or, you know, if it's good and it has a good cover, it's a huge bonus. It just matters a lot to me. Also, you want to know, like, if there's other books in the series. Fantasy books where there's a lot of books in the series are probably good, because no one's going to write a sequel if the first book wasn't really good, okay? And no one's going to write a third book if the first two books weren't really good. So generally speaking, like, for example, I don't think it doesn't really tell you in the back. Sometimes it does, but if you go in the front and you flip over a couple of pages in, you're going to see if this is a series. Like, for example, it says right over here, it says like Incarnation of Immortality series. This is book 7, right? And so there's like 6 other books. So basically this is book 7, and which means that like this book was good enough that the publisher published 7 versions of the story, and then the 7th one, national bestseller. So that means the whole series was considered really good. And next to it, which is cool, you're going to see other works by the author. This author is Piers Anthony, and you're going to see other works. For example, here his Xanth series is shown. He does a lot of other series that were really good, but they only show you a couple. Xanth is like amazing, crazy. Like, he's done so far, I don't know, like over 30 books for Xanth. I don't know if it's like in the 20s or the 30s. I think it's in the 30s. He's done, that's like his main story. And then I tried getting into Xanth. I tried reading the first story. I kind of read a little bit of it. I put it down. I don't know. Sometimes, you know, you'll like the story right away, and sometimes you have to kind of read through a little bit of it to actually see if it's good, if it really speaks to you. But yeah, yeah. So this is like book 7 of Incarnation of Immortality. Another way to know is authors. If it's Piers Anthony, almost everything he writes is amazing. And the other author I want to recommend, if you guys just like off the bat, because I did say in the title that, you know, how do you find really good fantasy novels? Piers Anthony, one of my favorite writers. He's still writing today. Michael Moorcock, still writing today. His older stuff, this is his older stuff. This is Mad God's Amulet. Amazing, amazing work. Yeah, and then what's cool is also, these are like the older books, and because his books are from the 70s and 80s, and same with Piers Anthony, also 70s and 80s. Because his books are in the 70s and 80s, you can get these older version. If you can find them, you can get older version books. The downside of these books is they're really hard to find in the bookstore right now, because this came out like in the 80s or something like that. I know like this story came out in the 80s, and at the time you'd be able to go to the bookshop in the fantasy section, and Piers Anthony was like a whole shelf of everything that he wrote. And now it's not so much. It's maybe this one, maybe another one, maybe a Xanth one. It's like, eh. So yeah, so basically, and then like here, you're gonna see, so yeah, so basically, if you like, here it is, book 2 of the Runestaff series. So again, with, it's gonna have a lot of different, if this guy wrote a lot of books, like, look, this is the list of books that he wrote, and they're really all good. Like almost all Michael Moorcock books are amazing. He's a British writer though, so if you guys in the UK, you're able to like really get this in the bookstore. Waterstones has a lot of his books, not as much the old fantasy ones for some reason, just the newer things that he's coming out with. In America and other countries, it's really, really difficult to find Michael Moorcock books because he's so English and stuff like that. But he just wrote so many books. And a good way to know, like if you go to the bookshop and it's like a shelf full of the same author, chances are you should check it out, because you never know, maybe you like it, maybe you won't with that one, but you should check it out, because that means that guy's a career writer. He didn't just like write a book, you know, which people do now. They're like, I'm going to write a book. They write a book. They're not really writers. They're not trying to be writers. They're not career writers. They're just like, I'm doing this thing. I'm doing that thing. I'm going to write a book. And they write a book, you know. But people that write one book, it could be great. It could not be great. But, you know, people that write books as a career, which means like they do it all day long, chances are that they're better writers just because of the amount of practice they get, just because the amount of like, you know, world building they have in their heads, you know, like they have this like idea of this character in this situation in this world and stuff like that, you know. So that's a cool way. If the writer wrote a lot of books, and it doesn't really mean too much sometimes, because I've seen like lately in like a Barnes & Noble or something like that, where you see a whole series of books and it's by one author, and then you'd be like, okay, well, I'll try it. And you read the first book and you read into like half the book and it's just like, it's not that great. But you know what? Even great books, even great books, not everyone's gonna like. Not everyone likes, even the best books that are considered like the best books, not everyone likes them. You know, there's always people that don't like those books. And of course, there's the books that people say these are horrible, that people love, and it's their favorite book. So you never know. But usually, you know, bestsellers, series, writers that wrote a lot of different books, writers that have been writing since the like 80s and stuff, and they're like in their 60s and 70s and still writing, that really matters. So that's a great way of knowing whether the book is good. I just like, you know, like okay, the thing about the cover, all right, does the cover mean that the book is good if it has a nice cover? Yes. I think that the cover means the book is good. And I'll tell you why, because the artist usually gets some kind of, you know, they actually read the book before they paint it. And a lot of times the artist does not want to put their art on a book that they don't feel is good. I know Michael Whelan, he reads the book. They give him the book before it's published to read it, or I don't know if they give him the whole book or they give him like part of the book, but they give him like, I don't know, they let him read the story first. And after he reads the story, he decides, okay, this is my idea for my image that I'm going to put on the front of the book. So what's cool is he didn't just like, you know, they didn't just say like, oh, draw a picture that has this, 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 and this, and that's what we want to put on the cover. They're actually giving him the story. They're actually like giving him the story so that he'll read it and so that the cover will reflect the actual story in the book. So that's a good way to know. There's also these like, there's also like awards that go to really good fantasy novels or really good fantasy authors. There's awards. Now there's 2 awards, and I think these are for science fiction, which is the Hugo and Nebula. I'm not sure if they're science fiction and fantasy or just science fiction, but Hugo and Nebula, since like science fiction and fantasy are kind of pushed in together, that, you know, based on people that I know and based on how bookstores like just like group fantasy and sci-fi into the same section, Hugo and Nebula, I think I know it's definitely science fiction awards, but one is science fiction and the other one is fantasy or whatever, but also like award-winning books. If it says like it won this award or that award, books that aren't good don't win awards, right? And yes, there are books that in the bookshop that you can buy, tons of them, that look good that you probably won't like. I mean, I've tried books that people have recommended and they look good and I can't get into it. You know, a good book you can get into within the first few chapters of the book. You shouldn't have to read half a book and still not be able to get into it. Usually it's like at the point where I read like a third or more of the book and I'm not into it, I'll just put it down. And it really takes a lot of like influence on other people's parts going, no, read the rest of the book. It gets better, you know, for me to actually read the rest of the book, because someone has to tell me that it's going to get better. Because otherwise, like, I can't sit down and read a whole book if it's going to be so boring or whatever, if I'm just not going to like it. I'm not saying the story's bad or the whatever, or the art, you know, the author's bad or the idea is bad or the book is bad. I'm just saying not everyone likes everything, you know. Some people like hamburgers, some people like hot dogs. It doesn't mean one is right and one is wrong, right? So same thing with literature. So that's a good way of knowing if they won awards. That's a great way of knowing. So so there's like, yeah, Piers Anthony. Also like classic books that are considered good. If you like, for example, books that they made movies about are usually good, always, because books that they make movies about, no one makes a movie from a book that's not good, ever, right? You know, someone writes a good book and someone says, hey, let's make a movie out of it. So books that have been like, for example, like the comic book Watchmen, they made a movie out of it. The movie sucked, the book was good. Okay. Well, actually, okay, I'm not going to say the movie sucked, but, you know, it was okay. But the book was amazing, and it did not reflect the book. It did not reflect the comic book. And also Alan Moore, who wrote the comic book, wanted nothing to do with any of the production of the movie. He just didn't want anything to do with it. He didn't want them to put his name on it and whatever. He was just like, they can do whatever they want with it, but he doesn't want anything to do with that. He wrote it as a comic book, and that's what he wanted to keep it as. Okay, but things that you've heard are good, sometimes are very, very good. Like Lord of the Rings. Like Lord of the Rings is a good book. In my opinion, it's not the best fantasy book out there, but it's okay. And I've read the first one, the first book. There's 3 of those, but there's 3 in the trilogy. And there's enough, and the first one is The Hobbit, which is like the beginning. It's before even the Lord of the Rings. There's one called The Hobbit, which is about The Hobbit, and then it's a standalone book. And then Lord of the Rings is like a 3-part big series. So like books that you've heard were like really good, that everyone knows about and everyone talks about, like, so that are complete bestsellers, like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. You know, it's chances are that you will like that book, because like it's just such a big bestseller. Like Harry Potter has his own section in the bookstore of just Harry Potter books. You know, it has to be a big, huge bestseller to have its own section. It's not even in the young, I don't know if it's like, think that Harry Potter is a weird book. It's for kids, it's for adults. It's sort of like young fantasy, but it's not, because like adults like it, and it was written by an adult. and it really wasn't, it's about a kid, but it's not really written for kids, you know, but it's like sort of like a kid's kind of dream thing, you know, maybe if people were kids and they always wished they were like wizards and stuff when they were kids, you know, that story would appeal to them. So there's that. So there's like Lord of the Rings, those huge, big books. They're usually good. I wouldn't stop there though, because the thing about like Lord of the Rings and whatever, it's like you can read it, but you want to like go on to the next thing after that. And so, yeah, so read those, but you want to go on to the next thing. Yeah, Piers Anthony is good. What else? Roger Zelazny is a really good writer. The thing about like books now is they're hard to find because right now, like it's online, like everything is online, everything is on your Nook. There's a lot fewer bookstores than there used to be. So when you like walk into a bookstore, you have like the whole section and you could like browse, you know, basically you would browse the book, you would look at the book and then you would be like, you would look at the cover of it and you'd look at the cover of it and you'd be like, that's a cool picture, right? You'd look at the back and a lot of times it's endorsed by other writers. And here, like in the back, it gives you like an idea of what the story's about. For some reason, I just remember buying books in bookstores in the fantasy section, and almost like every book I would pick out was really good. I really enjoyed like every book I picked out, and it really wasn't a big deal like what book is good, because I think almost all of them were really good in the bookshop. And then like something happened where it was harder to find the better books, and there was just a lot more books, but they were like series that I couldn't get into. Like I couldn't get into the Dresden Files. I couldn't get into those Bites books about the vampire. I couldn't get into that one. On Basilisk Station, I couldn't get into that one too much. Like, I'm sure it's good. I mean, it's a bestseller and whatever, and the whole series is good. Basilisk Flying Thing. Basilisk Station. Like that one. There's a Wheel of the World or something. There's another one like that. Wheel of the World or whatever, which is supposed to be good. But, what the hell? Okay. So those things are supposed to be good. So, yeah, so good way to tell. You can never really tell 100%, but good way to tell. An author that you've heard good things about, an author that has a lot of books on the shelf, an author that has written series, like whole series, where like, you know, like 3 books in a series, 6 books in a series, like 20 books in a series. Those are usually really good. Books with good illustrations on the front, because sometimes the author, the artist will only, like a good artist will only put their work on good books, you know, because nobody wants to put their beautiful artwork on a book that's not good. That's a way to do it. Read the back, see if it's a bestseller. You know, okay, this is a good one. It's not a spoiler to just like open the book in the middle and read a couple of pages, because that's important to do, I think, because like what this gives you to do, it just like, you know, it could be a good story and whatever, and it could be, you know, well written, whatever, but you want it to be like written in a way that appeals to you. And you don't want to like read, you know, someone's writing that you really can't focus on or like really understand or something like that. Like you want to read a few pages, like in the middle of the book. It's not going to spoil anything, because chances are it's just some conversation that's happening that's not really in the main point of the book. So you're usually not going to spoil anything. You don't want to read the back of it, but you want to like open the middle of it or something, or toward the front, whatever, and read a few pages. And it gives you an idea of how it's written, the timing, the pace, the style of the writer, how it looks. See if it appeals to you. You know, I mean, there's no way to really know, you know, but I also think that like worst comes to worst, if you buy a book and you don't like it, you can sell it back. You could sell it back. You could sell it online. You know, you could probably make, you know, whatever money it is, you can probably make some of it back and whatever, or you can give it to somebody that you think will like it and stuff like that. But yeah, but if it looks good and you're convinced that the writer's good and you read the middle of it and it sounds pretty cool, then that's a great way of knowing. What else is a good way to tell? If the writer has a lot, also like if the writer's been around for a while, like if the writer's writing now and the book is from like the 70s or 80s and stuff like that, usually like that's a good indication the book is good, because when the writer is still writing, it means that publishers are publishing his book, which means people are buying the book, which means people are liking the books. So that's another way to know if the book is going to be good, by how long that writer's been writing. And a lot of times the earlier writings from a writer is sometimes better than the later writings, because when a writer writes a book and a story, they write what's in their head and they write what's in their mind, and they tell the story they want to tell. And what happens is that like they tell that story, but now after they've told that story, they're a professional writer. So now they have to like think of another story. So like the later stories that they write are stories they have to really think of and come out with. And sometimes they're really good, but sometimes they're like, well, what do I write now? Because I've already written everything I've wanted to write. Now what do I do? You know, sometimes like the older stuff is a lot better. So if the writer's writing now and they have older books, it's usually better. And also like the short stories or the single edition books, like not the sequels, I wouldn't go ahead and take a chance on those too much. Because if it's a single standalone book, it means that they didn't continue that story. They didn't continue that series. And sometimes they just wanted to write the standalone book, but a lot of times it's like when that first book really gives the author ideas, and writer and the readers are really like responsive to those ideas and really, really love the story. The readers are like, write a sequel, write a third book, write a fourth book, write a fifth book. You know, Frank Herbert, science fiction, Frank Herbert wrote a ton of books. Of course, like people consider Dune, the first book, to be really, really good and his best work. He still wrote a whole bunch of other books because the first book was so good that the readers were like, we want more of this story. Don't just stop at one book, continue the story. So lots of times the best stories are the stories that have a series of, are in a series. Okay, so it's not always that great, but whatever. Also, like when you look at the front cover, you could tell what the book's about. Like if there's a battle scene on it, or if there's some kind of magic on it, if there's a wizard on it, there's monsters on it, and whatever it is, you can kind of tell what's inside the book and the idea and the feel that the book is gonna really, really get. And the rest of it is just the luck of the draw. But Joe, pay attention to what your friends that like fantasy books say. It's not always it's not always going to lead you to the right book, but sometimes they'll give you a good idea of the book. And also, let your friends lend you books instead of buy the book at the store. Because if your friend lends you a book that they like and you don't like it, you just give it back to them. You don't have to like lose any money from like buying a book you don't like. Also, in the past, it wasn't such a big deal. Now books are a little bit more expensive, but this one was like $7.99. Okay, so it wasn't that big of a deal in buying a book that you didn't like, but this one is actually really good. So this book is amazing. Piers Anthony, the Incarnations of Immortality series, any of the older Michael Moorcock stories, the Runestaff series, the Elric series, the Elric Saga, creator of the Elric Saga. Oh yeah, one more thing. Like if you see a book and it says this guy's, like the guy's name, like Michael Moorcock, and it says creator of the Elric saga. Usually on the front of the book, creator of this is usually his best work. So on the other books that the writer has written, you'll probably see ideas of what that person's best work was. And in my opinion, a lot of people's opinion, the Elric saga was the person's best book and stuff like that. So yeah. And yeah, so there's lots of different reasons. Let me know in the comments any other ways that you guys know of picking out the best fantasy book and sci-fi. Well, sci-fi book too. Why not? I mean, they're in the same section, you know. And yeah, so yeah. What's also cool is that when you're in a store, you can just kind of like sit there and read the book a little bit. You might want to start at the beginning and read like a chapter of it and see if it really speaks to you. Or you might want to just like read a couple of pages in the middle or a couple of pages in the end. But like if you have the time, you know, if you have like half an hour at that bookstore and you want to know if that book is going to be good, just read the first chapter. It doesn't mean like that's really going to tell you whether the book is good, but a lot of times it's a good indication of reading the first chapter is a good indication of whether you want to continue reading that story or not. So those are some ways of doing it. Let me know if you guys know like any other ways of doing it. Hope you liked the video. Like and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in another video later. Take care.